Choose my fate, end it, or stay with me, pleaded the Apache widow. And the rancher changed her future. The sun was dipping low behind the jagged peaks of the desert, painting the sky with streaks of gold and red. Dust rose in small whirlwinds along the long dirt road that led to the outskirts of the small Arizona town. It was quiet, too quiet, except for the occasional caw of a crow or the soft clatter of hooves from a distant horse. The town itself looked almost frozen in time. Wooden buildings lined the main street, and the old general store's bell jingled every now and then when a door opened. But today, there was no one in sight except for a woman walking alone, her steps heavy with sorrow. Maria was an Apache widow. Her life had been turned upside down in a matter of months, maybe even weeks, though it felt like an eternity. The accident that had taken her husband had left her in a fog of grief so deep that even the simplest tasks felt impossible. She carried a small cloth bag with her few belongings, and her eyes, dark and weary, scanned the town as though searching for something she couldn't name. Each step seemed to weigh more than the last. Her mind replayed the moment she had lost him, the sudden crash, the sound of shattering glass, the life slipping away in an instant. The memory was sharp and cruel, stabbing at her heart again and again. The townspeople had mostly stayed away from her, offering pitying looks or hushed whispers behind closed doors. Maria had heard the murmurs, "Poor woman, she looks lost. How will she go on alone?" But it did little to soothe her loneliness. In her world, she had been strong. She had faced storms, wild animals, and the harsh desert itself. But nothing had prepared her for the emptiness left behind when love was suddenly taken. Now, even the sun seemed too bright, too harsh, as if the world itself refused to let her mourn in peace. Her feet led her to the edge of town, where a large wooden gate opened to a ranch. The sign above, painted in faded letters, read, "Jake Harrison Ranch." She had heard the name whispered around town. Jake Harrison was known as a man of few words, a rancher who kept to himself, tough as the land he worked. But there was a kindness in his eyes, people said, a strength that was quiet but unyielding. Maria didn't know what drew her there, whether it was desperation or hope, but she found herself standing at the gate, staring at the wide expanse of land stretching out before her. The ranch was alive with movement, though it was a controlled kind of chaos. Horses grazed in the paddocks, their coats glinting in the last rays of sunlight. Chickens clucked as they scratched the dirt near the barn, and a few cows lowed softly in the distance. Jake himself appeared, a tall man with weathered skin and eyes that seemed to look right through the surface of people. His hat was pulled low, and his hands were calloused from years of work. When he saw Maria standing there, hesitating, he didn't speak immediately. He simply studied her, his gaze steady but not unkind. Maria took a shaky breath. She wasn't sure why she felt the need to speak, but something inside her demanded it. I need help," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt strange on her tongue, unfamiliar and heavy with shame. She had never been one to ask for anything, always relying on herself, always fighting through every storm. But now the storm was inside her, and it was too big to face alone. Jake finally spoke, his voice calm and steady like the river that ran through the ranch during the spring thaw. "What kind of help?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. There was no judgment in his tone, only a quiet curiosity. Maria swallowed hard. I don't know how to go on," she admitted. "My husband, he's gone, and I don't know if I have the strength to stay." Her words trembled, not from fear of him, but from fear of admitting the truth to herself and to anyone else. She had been holding it all in, the despair that gnawed at her every waking moment, but now it spilled out, raw and unfiltered. Jake didn't respond right away. Instead, he walked slowly toward the barn, gesturing for her to follow. The ranch wasn't just a place of work, it was a sanctuary of sorts. There was a rhythm to it, a sense that the land itself demanded respect, but also offered life in return. Maria noticed small details. The smell of hay mixed with the desert air, the soft clatter of tools being put away, the low hum of contented animals. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of something other than grief. "You don't have to decide anything right now," Jake said as they walked. "But if you want, you can stay here for a while. Work the land, care for the animals, sometimes doing something with your hands. It helps when your mind is too loud." His voice was gentle, but there was a firmness to it, a sense that he had faced hardships himself and survived. Maria hesitated. She wasn't used to kindness, especially from strangers. But something about Jake's calm presence made her feel safer than she had in months. I don't know if I can," she said quietly. "I'm not sure I even want to." Jake nodded, as if he understood exactly what she meant. "You don't have to. You just need to take the first step." He left her for a moment near the barn, giving her space, and she watched as the last light of day disappeared behind the mountains. Shadows stretched long across the dirt, and the cool evening air made her shiver. But in that chill, there was also a strange comfort. The world was vast and unforgiving, yes, but it was also full of life, full of possibility, even for someone who had lost everything. That night, Maria slept in the small guest room of the ranch, her body exhausted but her mind restless. She thought of her husband constantly, of the life they had planned together, the dreams that were never realized. Tears came unbidden, and she didn't try to stop them. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her sorrow. But amidst the sadness, there was also a tiny spark, a thought that maybe, just maybe, there was a reason to keep going. The next morning, the ranch came alive in a way that made Maria feel strangely hopeful. The sun rose bright and warm, spilling golden light across the paddocks. Jake was already tending the horses, his movements precise but effortless. When he saw Maria, he smiled briefly, a small gesture that carried more warmth than words could. "Ready to start?" he asked. Maria nodded, even though doubt still lingered in her heart. She didn't know if she was ready to face the world, but she knew she couldn't stay frozen in grief forever. And so, with hesitant steps, she followed Jake out into the ranch, into a world that was both harsh and beautiful, ready to see if life still had something to offer. Over the next few hours, Maria learned simple tasks: feeding the chickens, mending a fence, carrying buckets of water to the horses. Her muscles ached, and the work was harder than she expected. But with each small accomplishment, she felt a flicker of strength return. Jake didn't rush her or expect perfection. He guided her, correcting gently when needed, praising small victories. Maria began to realize that the land demanded effort, but it also gave back in ways she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of accomplishment, a sense of purpose, a sense that life wasn't entirely lost. By evening, as the sun set again in streaks of fire across the horizon, Maria felt something she hadn't in months, a quiet peace. She was still grieving, yes, and the emptiness remained. But for the first time, she believed that maybe she could survive, maybe even find moments of joy again. And though she didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of a journey that would test her, challenge her, and ultimately change her life in ways she could never have imagined. The morning after Maria began her first day on the ranch, a quiet tension hung in the air. The desert sun had barely risen, and the faint chill of dawn still lingered over the land. Maria woke early, feeling the stiffness in her muscles from yesterday's labor, but also a strange sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in weeks. She dressed quickly, pulling on worn jeans and a simple shirt, and stepped outside. The air smelled of hay, dirt, and the faint sweetness of wild desert flowers. It was a harsh beauty, but it soothed something deep inside her. Jake was already in the barn, checking the horses and brushing their coats. He glanced up as Maria approached. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried the quiet intensity of someone who had lived through hardship and come out stronger. "Good morning," he said simply. There was no small talk, no unnecessary words, just a presence that was steady and reassuring. Maria nodded, unsure if she could trust herself to speak much yet. They began the day's chores together. Maria carried water to the horses, fed the chickens, and helped mend a broken fence. Each task was simple but demanding, forcing her to focus on the present rather than the memories that threatened to pull her back into despair. Jake worked beside her, occasionally giving a gentle instruction or a nod of encouragement. His presence was a quiet anchor, something steady and real in a world that had recently felt chaotic and cruel. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Maria found herself growing tired. Sweat dripped down her back and her hands were sore from gripping the buckets and tools. She paused, leaning against a post for a moment, letting out a long, shaky breath. Jake noticed and came over. "You're doing fine," he said. His voice wasn't patronizing. It was honest, grounded, and somehow comforting. "Take your time. The work doesn't leave anyone behind as long as you try." Maria looked at him, her eyes welling with tears she hadn't meant to shed. "I don't know if I can keep trying," she whispered. "Everything in my life, it's gone. My husband, our home, it all disappeared so fast. I feel like I'm carrying nothing but pain." Jake didn't try to give her a quick answer or pat her hand. Instead, he leaned against the post beside her, silent for a moment, letting the wind carry the soft sounds of the ranch. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and calm. "Pain doesn't disappear, Maria. It doesn't vanish overnight, but you can carry it differently. You can let it guide you instead of crushing you." Maria shook her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I don't know how to do that. I don't even know if I want to." Her words were raw, honest, and frightening in their truth. She had spent so long hiding her despair, trying to convince herself that she was strong enough to survive alone. But now, here on this ranch, with this man who barely knew her yet treated her with respect and patience, her walls were crumbling. Jake nodded slowly, as though he understood more than she could imagine. "You don't have to want to. You just have to take one step, that's all." Maria stayed silent for a while, staring at the horses grazing quietly in the paddock. Their calm, steady presence reminded her that life could go on, even when it felt impossible. And yet, the thought of continuing, of really living again, seemed almost too much to bear. The weight of grief was heavy, pressing down on her chest like a stone. That evening, after the sun had set, and the sky was painted with soft shades of pink and orange, Maria found herself sitting on the porch of the small guest room she had been given. The ranch was quiet now, the animals settled for the night, and Jake was inside tending to the barn chores. She hugged her knees to her chest, staring out at the vast desert beyond. A sudden, trembling voice escaped her lips. "Jake," she called softly. When he appeared at the doorway, she felt a pang of fear, of vulnerability she wasn't used to showing. I can't do this alone. I don't want to end my life, but I don't know if I can live either. I feel lost." Jake stepped closer, his shadow falling over her as he sat beside her. He didn't speak immediately, giving her the space to let the words come. She continued, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I feel like I have no future, like everything I hoped for is gone. And I don't want to hurt anyone, but I don't know if I can survive this emptiness." He listened quietly, nodding occasionally, his presence steady and grounding. Then, after a pause, he spoke with a gentle firmness that made her sit up a little straighter. "Maria, I can't choose your fate for you. Only you can do that, but I can promise you something. You don't have to face this alone. You won't have to." Maria looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of judgment, but there was none. Just understanding, just patience. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of hope, tiny but real, that maybe there was someone in the world who could see her, not just her grief, but her strength too. Over the next few days, Maria and Jake continued to work together. Every chore, every small task became a step toward healing. They repaired fences, tended animals, and even planted a small garden in a quiet corner of the ranch. Maria began to feel the rhythm of the land in her bones, the steady pulse of life, of work that mattered. She still felt sorrow, and some mornings were harder than others, but gradually she noticed that her mind wasn't always consumed by despair. She began to notice small things again: the sound of a horse nuzzling her hand, the warmth of sunlight on her back, the smell of fresh hay in the barn. One afternoon, as they worked side by side repairing a fence that had been damaged by a recent storm, Maria finally spoke with a hint of laughter in her voice. "I didn't know fence repair could be this hard," she said, struggling to hammer a loose post into place. Jake chuckled, a deep, warm sound that echoed across the empty fields. "It's not easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is," he replied. For the first time, Maria realized that maybe life didn't have to be only pain and loss. Maybe it could hold small victories, small joys, moments of peace that made the sorrow a little easier to bear. And while the wound of losing her husband would never fully heal, she began to understand that she could carry it differently, gently, with strength, and with the possibility of a new beginning. One evening, as the desert sky blazed with color, Maria finally turned to Jake, her voice barely above a whisper but filled with determination. "I don't know what the future holds, Jake. I don't know if I'm strong enough, but I don't want to give up. I want to try." Jake nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "That's all I'm asking for, one step at a time, and I'll be here for the next one too, no matter what." Maria felt a warmth spread through her chest that she hadn't felt in months. It wasn't a complete relief from her grief. She knew that would take time, but it was the first spark of something new: trust, hope, and the possibility of living again. That night she went to sleep feeling lighter, even if only slightly, with the knowledge that someone believed in her, and that maybe, just maybe, she could believe in herself too. And so, her days on the ranch began to take on a rhythm of their own. Each morning brought new challenges and new lessons, each evening a quiet reflection on the small victories of the day. She began to see life not as an endless burden but as a series of steps, some hard, some small, some beautiful. And through it all, Jake remained a steady presence, not pushing, not judging, simply allowing her the space to heal, the space to choose her own path. For Maria, this was more than just a chance to survive. It was the beginning of a journey to reclaim her life, to rediscover strength she thought she had lost, and to find a future that, while uncertain, held the promise of hope, connection, and perhaps even love once again. The sun had just begun to rise over the desert when Maria stepped outside to begin her day. The air was crisp and carried the scent of sand and dry grass, mixed with the faint sweetness of early morning flowers. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs, and for a moment the weight of her grief felt lighter. She thought of Jake, already at work with the horses, his figure outlined against the golden glow of dawn. There was a quiet strength about him, a patience that seemed endless. And somehow, being near him made her feel safer, even in the face of her pain. That morning, Jake had decided it was time to teach Maria how to ride one of the ranch horses. It wasn't a simple task. The horse, a strong chestnut mare named Bella, had a stubborn streak and required confidence to handle. Maria had never been comfortable around horses, and the thought of climbing onto Bella's back made her stomach tighten with anxiety. She hesitated at the fence, her hands gripping the wooden rails, and Jake noticed immediately. "Take it slow," he said softly, approaching her. "Horses can sense fear, but they also sense confidence. You don't have to be perfect. Just trust yourself and trust Bella." Maria nodded, swallowing hard. She had spent so much time afraid of life, afraid of loss, afraid of failing. But now, standing on the edge of the paddock, looking into Jake's calm, steady eyes, she felt a spark of courage. Slowly, with Jake's guidance, she reached out to stroke Bella's mane. The horse nuzzled her hand gently, and Maria felt a tiny smile appear on her lips. "Good," Jake said, his voice quiet but warm. "Now we'll try getting you on her back." It took several attempts, each one more wobbly than the last. Maria's muscles ached from gripping the saddle and trying to balance herself, but Jake never let her feel embarrassed. He encouraged her, adjusted her posture, and whispered reminders that she was doing well. And then finally she was sitting atop Bella, trembling but smiling. The mare shifted beneath her, steady and reassuring, and Maria felt something stir inside her, an unfamiliar mix of pride and exhilaration. "See," Jake said, stepping back slightly. "You've got this. Just take it one step at a time." They spent the morning riding through the ranch's open fields, Maria slowly gaining confidence with each passing minute. The desert stretched endlessly around them, golden and vast, and the wind whipped through her hair, carrying with it the sense of freedom she hadn't felt in months. For the first time since her husband's death, Maria laughed, a sound that felt strange yet joyful in her own ears. Jake smiled, watching her, but didn't interrupt the moment. He understood that these small victories were monumental for her. By midday, the sky had turned a deep, brilliant blue, and clouds of heat began to rise from the desert floor. Maria dismounted Bella, her legs shaking but her spirit lighter than it had been in weeks. "Thank you," she said, looking at Jake. "I didn't think I could do it." "You just needed to try," he replied, his tone calm and steady. "Sometimes the first step is the hardest." As they headed back to the barn, dark clouds began to gather on the horizon. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a chill that made the air feel heavy and foreboding. Maria glanced up, sensing the storm before it arrived. "Jake, it looks like a storm is coming," she said, a hint of worry in her voice. Jake nodded, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the sky. "We'll need to get the animals safe," he said. "Let's hurry." They moved quickly, working together to secure the horses in their stalls and bring the chickens and cows into sheltered areas. Maria carried buckets and helped close gates, her hands moving faster than they had all morning. The first drops of rain began to fall as they finished, small at first, then growing into a steady downpour. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of wet earth and ozone. Just as they finished, a loud crack of lightning struck near the barn, startling the horses and sending a few running in panic. Maria froze for a moment, her heart pounding, but Jake grabbed her hand firmly. "Come on," he said, his voice calm despite the storm. "We'll get through this together." They ran to the barn, pulling the animals inside and securing the doors against the wind. Rain lashed against the wooden walls, and the thunder seemed to shake the ground beneath them. Maria clung to Jake's side, her fear raw and real, but she felt a strange sense of safety in his presence. He wasn't just a rancher, he was a protector, someone who would face danger without hesitation. Hours passed as the storm raged outside. Maria and Jake worked tirelessly to calm the frightened animals, making sure none were hurt or lost. By the time the rain finally began to ease, both were drenched, their clothes soaked and heavy, but there was a sense of accomplishment in the air. They had faced the storm together and they had survived. Sitting on a bale of hay, catching their breath, Maria looked at Jake, her eyes wide and filled with emotion. I don't know what I would have done without you," she said softly. "I thought I could handle things alone, but today showed me I couldn't, not without help." Jake shook his head gently. "You could handle it, Maria. You just needed someone to stand beside you while you did." His eyes met hers, steady and sincere, and for a moment the world felt still. The storm had passed, leaving only the sound of dripping water and the soft rustle of hay in the barn. For the first time since her husband's death, Maria felt a sense of connection, an understanding that life didn't have to be faced alone. She realized that she could lean on someone without shame, that asking for help didn't make her weak. And in that realization, she felt something new stirring inside her: hope. The next few days were quieter, but they were filled with small challenges that tested Maria in different ways. She learned to ride with confidence, to care for the animals on her own, and to face the harsh realities of ranch life with determination. Each task, no matter how small, was a step toward healing. And each evening, as she watched the sun set over the desert, she felt a growing sense of belonging. Belonging not only to the ranch, but to the life she was slowly reclaiming. One afternoon, while repairing a section of the fence that had been weakened by the storm, Maria stumbled and scraped her hand on a sharp piece of wood. She winced, holding it tightly, and Jake immediately rushed to her side. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern in his voice. Maria nodded, biting back a small groan. "I'm fine," she said, though her hand throbbed with pain. Jake gently cleaned the wound and wrapped it in a cloth. "You're stronger than you think," he said quietly. "It's okay to hurt, but don't let it stop you. Every scar is a reminder that you faced the challenge and survived." Maria looked at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I think I'm starting to understand," she said. "Life isn't about avoiding pain. It's about facing it step by step." Jake nodded, satisfied. "Exactly. And you don't have to face it alone anymore." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the desert sky turn shades of purple and orange, Maria felt a peace she hadn't known in months. She still mourned her husband, and the ache in her heart was real, but she also felt a sense of strength growing within her. The storm had tested her, challenged her, and yet she had emerged stronger. And through it all, Jake had been there, not to fix her life, but to walk beside her as she learned to rebuild it herself. For Maria, that day marked a turning point. She realized that life could still hold beauty, even in the face of tragedy. She understood that it was possible to find joy, to feel hope, and to connect with someone who truly saw her, not just her grief, but her resilience, her courage, and her heart. And as the stars began to appear in the desert sky, Maria felt a quiet determination take root. She didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time she was ready to face it, with courage, with strength, and with the support of someone who believed in her. The days on the ranch settled into a steady rhythm after the storm. Morning light would spill over the desert, painting the earth in shades of gold and amber, and Maria would wake with the sun, her body sore from work but her spirit lighter than it had been in months. Each day brought new tasks and small challenges: feeding the animals, repairing fences, carrying buckets of water across the hot, dusty land. But Maria approached them differently now. She no longer felt crushed by the weight of grief, though it was still there. Instead, she began to notice a spark of something she had forgotten: purpose. Jake had become her guide in more ways than one. He didn't push her to do anything she wasn't ready for, but he always encouraged her to try. His calm presence was a constant reassurance, a reminder that even in a world that could feel harsh and unforgiving, someone could offer steady support. Maria had begun to trust him in a way she hadn't trusted anyone since her husband's death. His quiet confidence and patience made it easier for her to face each day, and slowly, she felt herself growing stronger. One morning, Maria found herself standing at the edge of a small field behind the barn, holding a basket of freshly picked vegetables. The sun was warm on her skin, and the wind rustled the leaves around her. She looked out across the land, the mountains in the distance, and felt a strange mix of pride and wonder. She had helped plant and tend this garden, and seeing the fruits of her labor thriving under her care gave her a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in a long time. Jake came up behind her carrying a bundle of hay. "You're getting good at this," he said, a hint of a smile on his lips. "The garden looks healthy and the animals are thriving. You've done well." Maria turned to him, feeling a warmth in her chest. "I never thought I could do any of this," she admitted. "I felt so helpless, so lost, but now I don't know. It feels like I'm finding myself again." Jake nodded, setting the hay down. "You are, it just takes time. And sometimes it takes the right environment and the right people to help you see it." His eyes met hers, steady and sincere, and Maria felt a flutter of something she hadn't expected. A quiet hope for the future, a feeling that maybe she could find happiness again. The afternoons on the ranch were spent teaching Maria new skills. She learned to mend fences with precision, to groom and feed the horses properly, and even to handle the cows during the occasional roundup. Each task was a small victory, and with each success, Maria felt her confidence growing. She laughed more freely now, her voice carrying across the open fields, a sound that blended with the wind and the soft clatter of hooves. One day, Jake took her to the edge of a dry creek bed, where they needed to clear fallen branches to prevent flooding when the next rain came. Maria was hesitant at first, unsure if she could manage the physical work, but Jake encouraged her with patient guidance. Step by step, they worked together, lifting branches, dragging them to the side and clearing the creek bed. The work was exhausting, but at the end of the day, Maria stood back and looked at the cleared path. She felt a surge of pride. She had done something tangible, something that mattered. "You did that," Jake said, watching her with quiet admiration. "You made this happen. That's not small." Maria smiled, feeling a warmth that had little to do with the desert sun. "I did," she said softly, "and I couldn't have done it without your guidance." Jake shook his head gently. "You could have. I just helped you see it." Over the next few weeks, Maria's healing continued in ways that went beyond the physical tasks of the ranch. She began to reconnect with the small joys of life, watching the sun rise and set, listening to the soft sounds of the animals, feeling the wind on her face. She even began to share stories of her past with Jake, tales of her childhood in the Apache community, memories of her husband, and the dreams they had shared. Each story was a piece of herself she had kept hidden, and sharing them was both frightening and liberating. Jake listened without judgment, offering small insights when appropriate, but mostly he just listened. And in doing so, he allowed Maria to see that her experiences, her grief, and her strength were all parts of her that deserved to be acknowledged and honored. She began to see herself not just as a widow, but as a woman capable of resilience, courage, and growth. One evening, as the sky turned pink and orange, Maria found herself sitting with Jake on the porch, sharing a simple meal of bread, cheese, and fresh vegetables from the garden. The desert stretched endlessly before them, the air warm and still. Maria felt a quiet contentment settle over her, a feeling she hadn't known in a long time. "Jake," she said softly, "I think I'm starting to feel alive again. I still miss him and I always will, but I don't feel like I'm drowning anymore. I feel like I can breathe." Jake looked at her, his eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "That's good," he said simply. "You're allowed to live, Maria. You're allowed to feel joy even after loss. It doesn't mean you've forgotten. It means you're strong enough to keep moving forward." Maria nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek, but this one wasn't just sadness. It was a mix of relief, gratitude, and hope. She realized that her life didn't have to be defined solely by tragedy. She could honor her past while also embracing the possibilities of the future. As the days turned into weeks, Maria continued to grow stronger and more confident. She began to anticipate challenges rather than fear them, and she started to see herself as capable, independent, and resilient. The bond between her and Jake deepened, built on trust, respect, and shared experience. There were moments of quiet connection, shared smiles, glances that lingered longer than necessary, and small gestures that spoke of care and understanding. One afternoon, while painting the fence along the edge of the pasture, Maria paused to look at the horizon. The mountains glowed in the late afternoon sun, and the desert seemed to stretch endlessly, full of promise. She realized that the land, the work, and the people she had met here were helping her heal in ways she hadn't thought possible. The fear that had once consumed her was now replaced with a cautious optimism, a belief that life could be meaningful again. Jake approached, carrying a bucket of paint and brushes. "Taking a break?" he asked with a small smile. Maria shook her head, laughing softly. "Just admiring the view," she said. "It's beautiful here, and I think I'm starting to understand why you love this place so much." Jake nodded, leaning against the fence beside her. "It's not just the land," he said. It's what you do with it, the life you build here, and I think you're doing a good job of it." Maria felt a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel completely alone. She had found someone who understood her pain, supported her healing, and believed in her strength. And in that belief, she found the courage to start imagining a future that wasn't defined solely by loss. That evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains and the desert was bathed in twilight, Maria sat quietly on the porch. The animals were settled for the night, the air was still, and the sky was filled with stars. She thought about her past, her grief, and the journey she had been on over the past weeks. And she realized that while the pain of losing her husband would always be a part of her, it no longer had to control her. She looked at Jake, who was cleaning the tools for the day, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. He hadn't fixed her life, but he had helped her see that she could rebuild it herself. And in that realization, Maria felt something she hadn't felt in months: hope. She whispered softly to herself, almost as if speaking to the desert around her, "I'm ready. I'm ready to live again. I'm ready to choose life, to choose hope." And with that quiet determination, Maria felt the weight of despair lift slightly from her shoulders. She knew there would still be hard days, still be moments of sorrow, but she also knew that she had the strength to face them. And with Jake by her side, steady and unwavering, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she could finally embrace a future filled with possibility, connection, and even joy. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, casting a warm, golden glow across the ranch. Maria stepped outside, breathing in the fresh air. The sky was clear, and the quiet stillness of the morning was comforting. She walked along the path toward the barn, noticing the way the light danced across the paddocks, making the dust sparkle like tiny stars. For the first time in months, she didn't feel the crushing weight of grief pressing down on her. Instead, there was a sense of calm determination in her chest, a feeling that she had the power to shape her own life. Jake was already outside, mending a fence along the edge of the pasture. When he saw Maria, he smiled, tipping his hat slightly. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and steady, just as it always was. "Good morning," Maria replied softly, returning the smile. There was something about his presence that grounded her, something that made the world feel manageable, even in its vastness. She had spent so long feeling lost, but now, with him beside her, the future seemed less frightening, more full of possibilities. The morning passed in quiet work, Maria carrying buckets of water to the horses and helping to repair a section of the barn roof that had been damaged during a recent windstorm. Each task reminded her of how far she had come. She was no longer the fragile, despairing widow who had arrived weeks ago. She was a woman with strength, resilience, and a sense of purpose. After lunch, Maria sat down on a bench under the shade of a tall mesquite tree. She watched the horses graze and listened to the soft clatter of the wind against the barn roof. Her thoughts wandered, as they often did, to the decision she had been putting off for weeks, the choice of what her future would look like. She had a chance to leave the ranch, to return to a city, to seek a life that might be different, perhaps safer, perhaps easier. But she also felt a deep connection to this land, to the work, and to Jake. Jake joined her on the bench, carrying a small bottle of water. He handed it to her without a word, and she took a grateful sip. They sat in silence for a moment, letting the peacefulness of the ranch wash over them. "I've been thinking," Maria began, her voice quiet. "About the future, about what I want." She paused, unsure if she could put her thoughts into words. "I used to think that living meant just surviving, just getting through each day. But now I think life can be more than that. I want to live with purpose. I want to be part of something bigger than myself." Jake listened, his eyes steady on hers. "And do you know what that is for you?" he asked softly. Maria looked out across the ranch, watching the sun glint off the fences and the horses. "I think I do," she said finally. "I want to stay here. I want to continue working the land, caring for the animals, building a life that's meaningful. And I want to do it with someone who believes in me, who stands beside me. Someone like you." Jake's face softened, a small smile playing on his lips. He reached out, taking her hand gently in his. "Maria," he said, "I can't promise that life will always be easy. There will be hard days, storms to face, and moments of doubt. But I can promise that I will stand by you. We'll face everything together and we'll build a life that matters." Maria felt a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't just the comfort of having someone beside her. It was the knowledge that she was choosing life, choosing hope, and choosing love again. She squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with emotion. "Then that's what I want," she said. "I choose this. I choose to stay, to live, and to face the future with you." The days that followed were filled with a sense of quiet joy and purpose. Maria threw herself into her work on the ranch, tending to the animals, repairing fences, and expanding the garden. Each task reminded her of her own strength, and each evening brought a sense of satisfaction that she hadn't felt in a long time. She found herself laughing more freely, sharing stories with Jake, and even planning small projects for the ranch's improvement. One afternoon, they decided to ride out to the far side of the property, where the land sloped gently toward a small canyon. Maria rode Bella confidently now, the mare moving smoothly beneath her. She glanced at Jake, who rode beside her on a larger brown horse, and felt a sense of pride. She had come so far, from the desperate, grieving woman who had first arrived at the ranch, to someone who could face challenges, learn new skills, and even find joy again. As they reached the edge of the canyon, Maria paused to take in the view. The sun was beginning to set, casting golden light over the rugged landscape. The sky was painted in shades of orange, pink, and purple, and the desert stretched endlessly before them. She felt a deep sense of peace settle over her, a feeling that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Jake nudged his horse closer to hers. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said quietly. Maria nodded, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "It is," she agreed. "And I feel like I can finally breathe again, like I have a future worth living for." They rode back slowly, savoring the quiet of the desert evening. When they reached the ranch, Maria dismounted and took a moment to watch the animals settle down for the night. Chickens clucked softly, horses nickered, and the cows lay in the shade, content and calm. For the first time, Maria felt a true sense of belonging. She was part of this land, part of this life, and part of a future she had chosen for herself. That night, as they sat on the porch sharing a simple meal, Maria spoke softly. "I never imagined life could feel this full. I thought happiness was gone forever, but now I see that it's possible, that I can find hope again, even after loss." Jake reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "You found it because you allowed yourself to. You trusted yourself and you trusted life again, and you trusted me." Maria smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Yes," she whispered, "I trusted. And I choose to keep trusting every day." Over the next few weeks, Maria and Jake continued to build their life together. They repaired old buildings on the ranch, expanded the garden, and even started a small area for raising chickens and goats. Each day brought new challenges, but also new rewards. Maria's confidence grew, and she began to see herself not just as a survivor, but as a woman capable of shaping her own destiny. One evening, after a long day of work, Maria and Jake sat quietly on the porch, watching the desert sky turn deep shades of purple and blue. The stars began to twinkle, and the air was filled with the soft sounds of the night, crickets chirping, the gentle rustle of leaves, and the occasional distant call of an owl. Maria leaned her head on Jake's shoulder, feeling a sense of peace she had never known before. "Jake," she said softly, "thank you for everything, for helping me see that life is worth living, for standing by me, for believing in me." Jake wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You did the hard part yourself. You chose life. You chose hope, and you chose to rebuild. I'm just here to walk beside you." Maria closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his presence and the stillness of the desert surround her. She felt the sorrow of her past, but it no longer controlled her. She had faced it, survived it, and found a new beginning. The future was hers to shape, and she was ready for it, ready to embrace life, love, and the possibilities that lay ahead. And in that quiet moment, under the vast expanse of stars, Maria knew with certainty that she had made the right choice. She had chosen life, she had chosen hope, and she had chosen a future where she could be happy again. With Jake beside her and the ranch as her home, she finally felt whole. The journey had been long and filled with pain, but it had also brought her to a place of healing, strength, and love. And as she watched the stars twinkle above the desert, Maria whispered a silent promise to herself: to never give up, to always embrace life, and to continue building a future that was truly her own.